Here we go again, and welcome to Drive Live with an Engineer. This is Carpool Careers on YouTube with Tech Equipment. This is a new series of live events, or you may be watching it on demand, where we interview different engineers, people who've been involved in different engineering roles over the course of their career. We look at their career, we look at the metaphorical cars that have been driving, or the challenges they might have come up against and overcome, so that students, so if you're watching this as a student, you can really begin to understand what different engineering roles entail, what the opportunities may be out there for you. It's an opportunity to get inspired, get involved, ask questions. Today, our guest is Charlotte Starkmann. Charlotte is a petroleum engineer, and Charlotte is based in London. Hello, Charlotte.
Hello, Dion. How are you?
I am full of cold, but I'm good because I've
Excellent.
taken my medicines and taken my vitamin C's, and I'm high on adrenaline for everybody who's watching around the world.
Brilliant.
Charlotte, let's have a look at your career then. First up, you started out with your education, and perhaps you could start us out with your whole A levels, and where you began, and the history of your family, and why you did a PhD in chemistry.
Well, I mean, I come from a background, my father's a vet, my uncle's a doctor, and so it was always, and I was always good at science, so it was always a done deal that I was going to go do something scientific and I was going to go to university. Having a father who was a vet and seeing that knowing that was a life, not a job, with constantly having a nice family meal with the phone going, him having to rush off. And of course, this is the days before mobile phones. So when he rushed off to go and look after an animal, we had to stay home. My mum had to sit by the phone in case somebody else called in with an emergency. So I knew that wasn't the kind of life, knew that I didn't want to become a doctor. So it was kind of like, well, I want to stay in science, despite the school trying to persuade me to be a doctor or a vet. I said, no, I'm going to go and do a science. And at A level, I did chemistry, maths, and physics. And chemistry was the area that I was really interested in. You know, I just like the fact that everything's made up of atoms, and just the whole kind of how things hang together is just fascinating to me. So it was a done deal that I was going to go do chemistry. I did chemistry at Durham University, very much enjoyed doing that. Did my first 2 years, got to year 3, and suddenly I'm like, oh, what am I going to do next? Having had a very clear path, well, you're going to go to university, you're going to do science, and suddenly I'm like, I've got to go out into the big wide world. I've got to get a job. What am I going to do? And for me, I know everyone around me was frantically applying for jobs, going on the milk run. Lots of people were applying to be accountants, because for some reason, the highest number of accountants come from chemistry in Durham, or at least that was when I was graduating. And I'm like, I know I don't want to be an accountant. What do I do? And so I started kind of really thinking about it in a lot of detail. I knew I liked science and kind of wanted to do that. But really, I think unlike a lot of engineering students, I had no exposure to industry. You know, my family background wasn't in industry operations. It's very much more of in the professional medicine, that type of environment. And, you know, I hadn't really had an exposure, so I didn't really know what that was. But I kind of thought, well, I wanted to use my science to solve problems, but I didn't really know. And I started looking into things. And again, this was at a time, I think the time we are in now is a special time. It's we're never going to repeat, or hopefully we're never going to repeat this COVID time. However, it was a similar time in terms of the economy wasn't brilliant. So coming out as a graduate, there weren't a huge number of jobs to go to, particularly being a chemist, because the chemical industry was quite suppressed at that time. So I looked, and I started investigating a bit more detail, and I actually looked at the salaries. And if you looked at the salary of someone, if I'd gone and done a graduate job in a pharma or a chemical company, compared to what I would get as a graduate, compared to what I would get on a grant doing my PhD. And once you've taken tax off the salary because I didn't have to pay tax as a research student, it wasn't much difference. And then I kind of thought, well, I could spend 3 years doing what I want to do, and spending time actually working out what I want to do, exploring a particular area and becoming an expert in that, driving my own direction, if you like, or I could go and work for somebody else. Coupled with the fact that particularly then, and I suspect it's still very much the same, particularly in pharma, you needed to have a PhD, otherwise you'd get to a glass ceiling and you wouldn't be able to progress. And I kind of thought, well, what have I got to lose, really? And that's kind of why I went and did a PhD, basically.
And what did you study in your PhD?
Well, I think one thing, before I said, one thing that is different to what a lot of people is, I actually moved universities to do my PhD.
Right.
And that wasn't very common at the time. I don't know how it is now, because universities tend to prefer their own students. So, if you do move, quite often you need to have a first or a higher degree. That wasn't my situation. I just managed to do it without. But that for me was quite important, because I had a different experience, and it meant I chose a new professor. My PhD title is Ligating Properties of Organophosphates, which probably means nothing to anyone but me. I think that, to me, was one of the cool things about doing a PhD, is I became an expert in a very specific subject, and I was the only one I was the one that was the true expert in that particular area, and nobody else was more expert than me, which is quite cool. But basically, the premise of what I was doing is, and I suspect, even though we're talking with engineers, most people on this call will know what organic chemistry is. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And that's all rings of carbon, and etc. And what my group was interested in was taking rings of carbon and replacing a carbon with a phosphorus. And because that's in a different group, it has an additional bonding site. So I had this quite cool compound which had a pentagon of 5 carbons on the bottom, an iron atom, and then like another structure above it, which was 3 phosphoruses and 2 carbons. And basically, I spent 3 years trying to see what I could attach to the different phosphorus atoms. And I made a new compound, I think it was week 2 of my PhD, and then spent the next 3 years trying to grow crystals of it to prove it was what I thought it was. Because on the spectrum, it was, but I couldn't, there was no, the absolute proof is if you grow crystals and then you do an X-ray structure of it, firing it with X-rays to actually get a crystal structure to say, yes, this is actually what you've made. So interesting times.
And did you succeed?
I did, and I made all sorts, and it got very frustrating because everyone else was growing crystals left, right, and centre. And I think I managed to get my first crystal structure about year 2, about 2.7 years through my PhD, so I left it quite far. But then I got about 4 crystal structures, one after another at that point, because suddenly things started to work. But yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, fantastic. But that's then you started out your career and you went to be a petroleum engineer, which isn't a chemist.
No. Well, it has elements of it, but it's not. Yeah. It's not. On paper, it looks a bit odd.
So tell me why. I think you mentioned it happened accidentally. How did this accidental jump into engineering occur?
Well, after spending 3 years in the lab, the one thing I knew, and I'm very good at knowing what I don't want, which, I think for a lot of people out there, you kind of think, oh God, but actually it is important to know what you don't want to do. And while I really enjoyed doing what I'm doing, I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life sitting in a lab. I knew I didn't want to stay in academia because if I'm bluntly honest, I wasn't bright enough to stay in academics and become a professor. So don't hang around if that's the case. And so what I didn't know I wanted to do, kind of very similar to when I was doing my degree, is I wanted to go and solve problems, because that's actually what I liked about the research, is you kind of constantly solving problems and constantly trying to find out answers. And that's the thing that really I really enjoy. And so, but what I wanted to do was, rather than just work on my own on a bench, I wanted to go out and solve real life problems, working with people from other disciplines. And initially I thought, okay, the way to do that is to go and join a chemical company or a big company, work on a bench for a bit, and then I'll get the opportunity to work on bigger projects and kind of go into management, and didn't really quite know how it worked, but that's sort of how I thought it would work. So I did what I'm sure a lot of the students on the call here, I applied to all the different companies that you do when you're in the process of finishing your degree, and I got an interview with Shell, and then I went through their assessment centre in Holland, and then they sent me back to Holland to go and talk to their research chemical people. And after all that process, well, they wanted me, there was no jobs in the chemical section of Shell. And I remember kind of coming back from the last trip and thinking, God, I put all this in and there probably isn't a job for me at the end of this. And well, I was a bit upset. And then at my student house, because again, this is, I'm showing my age here, this is before you had a mobile phone. So I got home from the lab to a message on the answer phone in my shared house. And there was this message saying, please call this number. So I did. And this guy said, oh, hello, Charlotte, do you remember me? And I'm like, no idea who this person is. And it was the person who had originally interviewed me probably about 4 months previously. And he said, you know, we really want you, but we don't have any jobs in chemistry. However, would you be interested in working in upstream oil and gas? And I'm like, I've no idea, what does that mean? No idea. I had no idea what that was. So he then started saying, well, you know, what you do, you know, this is all about, you know, because upstream, maybe I should just stop there and explain upstream oil and gas.
Yeah, because I'm not that clear on what
basically
oil and gas is. I just think oil platform in the sea, frankly, and that's naive.
That's kind of it. Basically, it's the bit of the value chain which is trying to find new sources of oil and gas under the rocks, and then it's drilling the holes and getting it up to surface. Basically, that's what upstream oil and gas is.
Well, I watched a brilliant series on drama on it on Netflix recently, actually.
Well, there you go.
It's a Scandi drama, if anybody wants a bit of an.
Oh yeah, and what's really good about that is it's actually very well done. It's actually, I watched that and I couldn't find any flaws. It's actually very realistic in terms of the engineering. So if you want to kind of see for that timeline, because obviously when you look at them, they're not wearing hats, safety hats and everything else. But in terms of the timescale, which I think was 1950s,
is it the 1960s or something?
1950s or 1960s. It's literally, just for anyone who hasn't seen this drama, it was set at the time when Norway first discovered oil and gas. So, but in terms of the technical stuff, it is actually very true to the thing. So yes, I recommend that if anyone's interested.
I would recommend it purely for its entertainment and value as well.
And it also has very good cars.
Yes, which we haven't talked about the cars yet. I've been a bit shameful because we're talking about whole drive live with the engineer, and we're using the whole idea of cars as a metaphor to tell the journey. And you started out in your lovely little Morris Minor there, and now you've gone up to a truck as a petroleum engineer.
Yes.
Perhaps you could tell us. So now you've got this job with Shell. Yes. What really does a petroleum engineer entail on those oil rigs?
Well, I mean, for starters, petroleum engineer, I use that's a very broad term, and it actually covers a number of different disciplines. It's a bit like if you say I'm an engineer, there are lots of different types of engineers that you can be. And so if you're a petroleum engineer, you can be a geologist, you can be a reservoir engineer, you can be a production technologist that I was, you can be a chemical technologist, I think, as well. And there are a number of other, there are even, you know, there's reservoir modeling experts, there's all sorts of as you can imagine, as time goes on and things become more specialist, there's even more different things. Effectively, a petroleum engineer is somebody that looks at the rocks underneath the ground. And my expertise was predominantly looking at the reservoir and working out how best we could get the gas or oil to flow up the pipe to surface, and looking at things and doing things like I had to say how much gas or oil I thought would be produced that month, because obviously we're producing gas. And I was working in Holland at the time. The equivalent of the national grid needed to know how much we were going to produce. They could say, yes, we want you to produce that, and that's you have to do every month. So that's the kind of thing that a petroleum engineer does. But that's not what I did when I first started with Shell.
So what did you do? I mean, I'm sure when we were chatting last week, we were talking about safety and this being a big element of what you were taking care of.
Well, this is because, again, I think I was saying to you, I really had no idea what I was going to do when I took this job on. So the good thing is they put me on a training course for probably about I think it was about 5 or 6 months, where I actually learnt the fundamentals of being a petroleum engineer and learnt some geology and everything else. So I actually was able to do the job. And then they said to me, oh, your first role, we're going to send you out to the oil rigs to drill for oil and gas. And I kind of went home that night and panicked, because I was like, oh my God. And Dion, you know, because you've seen Netflix and you've seen them on the platforms drilling, and there's mud flying everywhere, and they're heaving pipes left, right and center, and there's all these strong men. And I'm thinking, and for those, because I'm sitting down, you can't see, but I'm 5'2", or just over 1.50 meters for those who aren't in the UK. I was like, I can't do that. And I was like, what have I set myself up for? That wasn't what I was expecting to do when I agreed to take a job for Shell. And then, after not sleeping all night, I went back and then sort of asked some further questions, which I should have done the day before, but that's, you learn. And actually said, no, you're not going to be on the drill floor. What you're actually going to be doing, this is more of a learning role for new graduates, for new graduate engineers, is we put you on the platform so you can learn, and your role is more to coordinate all of the contractors, coordinate specific jobs. So for example, one of the things I had to do was measure pipe, which sounds a bit weird, but when you drill a well, you drill a big hole. And as many of the people on the call, I'm sure know, that as the deeper you get down into the earth, the higher the pressure. So you drill a certain distance, you have to put a pipe in, cement it in, and then drill down just to manage the pressures. Otherwise the hole will collapse in, and you're never getting anywhere. And so these are long sections of pipe, several meters, and really big diameters. And for some reason they don't manufacture them to exact lengths, so so you need to kind of know how, because what you don't want to be doing is putting the pipe in and then get to the bottom of the hole and you've got some pipe sticking out the other end. So what you want to do is kind of like drill to fit a length of pipe, a serious length pipe. So you have to measure the pipe, so as when you get to a certain depth, to tell them, if you drill another 3 meters, that means we can hit the ground, and we can put pipes in, and we've not got half a pipe sticking out the hole, kind of thing.
So it's a bit like drilling your hole in the wall to put your raw plug in.
Exactly.
You absolutely do not want to be cutting
like
your raw plug off.
But imagine all your raw plugs are different lengths. Right, so you have to kind of measure the raw plug, but except for this is on a much, much bigger scale. And kind of going to your point, this is, that might sound like a silly thing, but one of the biggest challenges I always had on the rig is those pipes are big things. It's a big stack of pipe, and if that gets unstable and rolls, it can kill somebody. And I know I know at least one person that lost part of their leg because they got trapped under one of those things. And it's things like, I would go out and I'd be instructed to measure it, but I would say, I'm not measuring that until you've tied that stuck up properly.
Mm.
And it's little, and that doesn't seem a big thing, but that's a huge thing. And it's little things like that that being on a well site really taught me a lot about safety. And further on in my career, you know, you realize as a petroleum engineer, often I was doing jobs that if they went wrong could kill somebody. So it's really important, and that's one reason Shell used to put people on the rigs like myself, so they understood the danger. So when they was running jobs, they had the awareness to make sure those small things were dealt with. Because if those small things aren't dealt with, you know, you can seriously hurt someone or potentially kill someone, which is not really what you want to be known for in your
We're
job.
talking about fulfilling careers here, aren't we?
Yes,
and that's
exactly.
not something that ticks that box.
It's a very good experience for me in terms of that, in terms of working with people from all over the world, and also from all different perspectives, because you know, a lot of the rig crew were not highly educated. Some of them weren't particularly good at reading and writing, and if you've just come from doing a PhD, it's quite good to sort of mix in a completely different environment. And it's given me a lot of stories which keep a lot of dinner party people very happy, including my dad and uncle, who think it's hilarious still that I used to work on an oil rig and had a heart out.
And talking about you know, your family views, because many people are influenced by what their family want them to do, or their opinions of where they're going in their career, and then that might have a positive impact. Sometimes it has a very detrimental impact. It can hold people back. It can mean that somebody does one degree and then they're not happy, and then they end up having to do another degree because they're pursuing what they really want to do. How did that influence you?
Well, I think when I was lucky because I was the eldest, so that might sound a bit strange, but because I was the eldest, my parents hadn't gone through the, oh my goodness, how difficult it is to get into a university, how challenging to get a first job, da 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 da. So I was kind of doing things and they didn't know what to worry about. So from that perspective, it was quite good. I think I mentioned before, going to university was always something that was a kind of, you know, both my parents went to university, and, you know, they were like, no, that's what we expect. I mean, if something had gone wrong and I'd really, it was clear that wasn't what was the right thing for me, they would have supported that. But I had a very, very much a support from that perspective. And I think it was once I was moving to the PhD element, that's, I think, when my parents really wanted to support me, but I think they struggled to some extent because they didn't really feel that they were informed enough.
Right.
And so they wanted to help me, but didn't really know how best to help me.
Right.
And I think and I think it's also, for my first job, because it was a job with Shell, that was a well-known company that they knew, they were like, oh, this is a really good job because she's going to be set up for life. If I had joined a small engineering firm that they didn't know, I think it would have been a harder, I think they wouldn't have stopped me, but I think they wouldn't have been as comfortable with the choices I'd made. And then being in my 20s, while you always make your own decisions, and I still do have a lot of respect for my parents, that makes it a bit harder. I mean, I'll talk. I don't want to sort of jump into the next bit, but when I did decide to leave Shell, that was a more challenging conversation because my dad thought I was absolutely insane leaving such a secure company. That was harder to do. But then I was further on in my career, so it was easier for me to kind of listen to what they had to say, but also not feel that I had to take everything that they said into account.
Right, yeah. I get that. So when you were at Shell, so you started out being out on the rigs and you were measuring pipes, did you, I mean, I know we talked about, we'll come onto that shortly, but you moving into management consulting, did you do any other roles there, or was it just at that point when you said?
No, well, I think because you're a graduate, you kind of you move around, and you know, after working on the rigs, I did a kind of special project which was unusual at that time, where I worked with the commercial guys, building like a database for them, which was really eye-opening, because I got to see how the oil and gas business works commercially, because a lot of it's through ventures and sharing and this kind of stuff. And that was really fascinating, because it was something other than just the technical work, which up to that date, you know, having done a degree, having done a PhD, you've just been working on the technical side. So that was really interesting. But then I went on and worked for their offshore unit, where I was the engineer in the office, talking to the guys offshore about basically keeping the wells secure, and drilling wells offshore as well. And it was very interesting to be the other side of coin, having been on the rig, then being in the office and talking to the people the other side, which was really fascinating.
And I mean, did you have a preference in your role there? Did you say, actually, I like being hands-on, or I like this?
I think they were all, I mean, I think they were all very different. I have to say, I was quite glad to stop working on the rigs, because that was where you were on the rigs a week on, a week off. So that's quite disruptive to lifestyle. And you know, and I was in Holland. They have a lot of well, the biggest gas field in Europe is actually onshore in Holland. In fact, they actually have oil fields under the city of Rotterdam. And if you look closely, I think everyone probably knows those nodding donkeys that you see in Texas. There are some of those dotted around Rotterdam. If you look closely, there's often you find them in a car park somewhere. So anyway, that's to the side. And I had my own little porter cabin, but I had to be on site 24/7. I got woken up in the middle of the night to do various things. And in fact, sometimes I actually had to make sure that they did wake me up, because sometimes they're a bit nervous about waking me up in the middle of the night. And that was quite glad. I was glad I did it, because I got the experience, but I was very glad I didn't have to do that for the rest of my life.
So you were having to go out and do safety inspections or something, or if something had gone wrong?
Well,
I envisage you sleeping on a bench in this porter cabin.
Well, it was like a proper bedroom.
Oh, okay.
So I did have a bathroom and a bed, because you know, with cooking facilities, that's, except for if the generator went out and you were in the middle of cooking dinner, that was a bit of a challenge. But anyway, you did actually have, you know, a proper. There was even laundry facilities on the rig, but I tended to take my laundry back with me. But it was all it was a proper porter cabin, kind of like one of those caravans. If you go to a caravan park and you've kind of got you've got like a bedroom and a living room, and I had a cable TV, although the cable TV just had news and I think cartoons or something, so it wasn't exactly
I'd envisaged like an empty shipping container kind of affair.
No, well, I had one of those which is kind of like the office, where I had a computer and everything else, but but things like, because it's 24/7 operations, because I was responsible, my activity came when so you drill, and then when you were putting the pipe in, putting the cement in, and prior to all that, you would often run equipment down the hole, what we call tools, really to take measurements, take samples, so that you got data on the geology, which would then help in future, help the people back in the office add to their models and understanding what was underneath the ground, so they could drill better wells in the future. So all of that kind of stuff, that was my busy time. And if that happened to happen in the middle of the night, and the worst time was if that happened the night of changeover day, then didn't get a chance to sleep during the day. And I think there was one time I did 36 hours on 3 hours sleep. So, but you know, that's and well, that's not against the European directive at the time. Somehow we had, I mean, it wasn't so bad, because you would just you would work and then you sleep. It's like shift work, but you can't predict your shifts. It was only particularly bad when you did handover, and therefore you couldn't sleep during the day because you had to go back home. So
okay,
that's but it's it was fun times.
Consuming times, by the sounds of it.
Yeah. But I mean, I very much enjoyed working. I mean, I think for me, I very much enjoyed working when I was in the offshore unit, talking with the guys on the rig, developing the relationships, and actually working together to solve problems. Because they'd call me up saying, oh, I don't know what's happening here, and I'd ask questions, or I'd see some data wasn't quite right, so then I'd give them a call and they'd say, well, let me check this. And that I very much enjoyed.
And was that, I mean, we talked about you moving on to management consulting. At what point did you go, I'm just going to stop being a petroleum engineer and I want to be a management consultant?
Well,
I want to move to a BMW equivalent, or
I think well, it wasn't so much the cars, because actually financially I did there was no difference when I changed, even though I went from Shell to PwC, because I was an expat for Shell. So basically the salary was almost the same. I think I might have even taken a bit of a hit. But what I realized, I took over these series of jobs which was just routine maintenance, and very importantly, as I know a lot of the engineers on the call, was about getting data. And these are the years when nowadays, when you drill wells, you've got all these fancy sensors and you can get all this data in real time. These were in the days when that wasn't possible. You had old wells and you'd literally run a pressure sensor into the well every couple of years to take a static pressure, which, you know, was very little data, but it was better than no data at all, which you can imagine is not a very complicated job. However, when I took this on, all of them had failed, which, when you're only getting a reading on these wells once every couple of years, is incredibly frustrating in the office. And it's not a complicated job. You just have to follow the process steps. So the reason it wasn't happening wasn't because there was complexity, it was because people weren't following the steps. So I started, as I do, kind of asking questions, putting employees in, doing a bit of investigations. And I remember at one point I was like, oh, well, I just look at the last 3 jobs which failed, and it was the same crew who did it, who went out and did it. Right, but I'm not having that crew again. And one of the Dutch engineers goes, you can't do that, Charlotte. Well, you're cool, but if it fails again, I will be asking some questions. Funnily enough, it didn't fail. And I was doing things like that. And then the guys on the rig started to call me, because I know this because some of my peers were saying, who were going out there going, they keep asking me who this Charlotte person is that keeps calling them up. It's like, why? Because no one else from the office would call them. And it became clear they didn't actually realise why these jobs were important and what was going on. And no one had, they were just focused on the equipment on the platform. They didn't really know what was going on underground. So I sent the other guys off with sort of short presentations so they could tell them a bit about what we were trying to do, what was going on. So it just made it a bit more interesting to them. And then over time, these guys, when they came and saw their bosses in the office, would come via my office and have a chat to me. And at that point, I started to realize I was more interested in solving problems with people and getting people to do things differently than I was how fast the gas was going in the pipe, which is, as an engineer, is in a slight design flaw. So I thought I better kind of like shift before somebody found out, because otherwise I might be in trouble. So that's kind of why I made the shift.
And what made it? I mean, did you have an idea, or did somebody tell you, right, okay, did you go, oh, look, I'm really not happy in this? Or did you suddenly look at this and think, yeah, I want to be a management consultant. Well, that's what's going to be the way for me.
Well, I think I kind of got, when I did my PhD, and I think I mentioned this earlier on the call, coming from the background I came from and doing chemistry, I really didn't have any idea of careers or industry or what companies did, etc., etc. And at the time when I was doing my PhD, the Research Council, that has now morphed several times with different names, so I can't even remember what the acronyms were at the time when I did it, set up for all of the for all PhD students, and that was engineers and chemists and biochemists and all sorts of things, that we go, I think it was a 3-day away day, and it was hosted at different campus universities, and they got a number of companies to get involved, and they ran case studies, business events. They talked about CVs. So you kind of really got a feel for what life was outside being a PhD student was like. And I remember one thing in particular where we did this case study that McKinsey, who, for those that don't know, is a very, very well-known management consultancy company, on how to solve a problem in Moscow because they didn't have any bread around about the time when communism collapsed. And I really enjoyed that. And I thought, this is really cool. This is kind of solving problems. I love this. And at the time I thought, oh, could never become a management consultant. Though. That just seems like far too difficult for me to do. I couldn't possibly do that. And then as I was doing stuff in jail, I thought, well, maybe that is the right kind of thing, because it's all about analysing problems. It's all about problem solving. I've got a really good skill set from that, as in terms of the science, the engineering, what I'm doing here. It's all about people. Maybe that's something I should look at. And at the time, I actually went to a careers coach because I knew I was enjoying what I was doing, but I knew I wouldn't enjoy it for the next 8-10 years, and I needed to find something that would keep me interested. So at that time I went to see a careers coach who kind of walked me through a process that then which was looking at what are the skills, what are my experiences, what am I good at, and that kind of validated the yes, management consultant is a good thing, is a good career for Charlotte because of the problem solving, because they need analytical, because of this. And he then helped me transition by getting me to understand what my skill set was, and also he rewrote my CV to be a project manager. So he wrote my CV to sell me as a management consultant in the job I wanted, as opposed to the CV that I would have gone with, which was my current CV as a petroleum engineer, which is a very different CV. It said exactly the same things, but it was just, talking about projects. So what I was talking about, running that schedule of jobs, that's a project. Drilling a well is a project. Coming up with a production forecast is a project. And that made it easy for people who were looking for management consultants to see how my skills would fit into what they did.
I suppose that's an important thing for students to know. In fact, anybody who also might be thinking about that or changing their career, is using the terminology that connects with the job that you want.
Yeah.
Not what you're doing now, or not what you used to be studying necessarily. I mean, there will be definitely terminology that you use, but using the right buzzwords that people think, yes, they know what we're talking about. They immersed in the idea of this industry, because you're not going to take somebody on if you don't think they get it, because getting is like the fundamental start point.
And I think it's more than just buzzwords. I think it's also about putting the stuff on your CV that is going to be valued by your future job. So there may be stuff that I can't think off the top of my. So I'm just thinking, as a petroleum engineer, what's very important is a lot of the health and safety things. So I didn't have on my CV like the health and safety certificates that I had. And I mean, I think I had it in passing, but if I'd gone on to do another petroleum engineering drawing, there'd be a lot more on that on my CV, which there wasn't in the project management.
Right,
piece,
yeah,
because that wasn't, I mean, knowing an awful lot about health and safety, knowing, for example, how to set up a crane or how to use a ladder isn't necessarily something that is important if you manage jobs offshore, but isn't important as a management consultant. So that doesn't need to be on CV. So I think that's one thing I'd say to the people on the call, think about that. And if you're unsure, I mean, I went to a careers coach. Nowadays, there's a lot of groups out there that do mentoring, a lot of the professional groups that, I'm still in the Society of Petroleum Engineers. They have mentors that help people to think about their careers. There's lots of other interest groups that are helpful. And if you go and find somebody who does the job that you want to do and talk to them and find out what are the things that they look for people who are coming in, and that's the way to do it.
Well, that's not an easy task though, is it? I mean, if you haven't got friends who are in that, or finding somebody Have you got any tips on how you might, I suppose you might have to use LinkedIn?
I think one of the best ways of to do it is to you know, starting point is to go through the sort of professional bodies. So I don't know what the engineering society is, because I
We'd
know
have
like
the IMechE, for example.
Yeah, so contact them and say, look, do they know anybody that has done this, because this is something that they're thinking to do, and that's a sort of non-for-profit, and they'll either say yes or no, but generally people in those kinds of societies are more than happy to talk to somebody else in the same group. It's
the IMechE do a lot of outreach activity, and there's in fact we've had a few people on some of our Q&A lives earlier in the year that are members of the IMechE, and it's part of what they do is to go out and outreach for people. So they're a great source of students if you are looking for those.
And I do that through the Energy. I'm a member of another sort of groups and that support people. You know, so one of the things I know, the OTC, the Oil and Gas Council up in Aberdeen, is specifically doing something at the moment to help people who are trying to transition out of petroleum engineering through the energy transition into renewables. So there's a lot of, it's about looking for that. So my tip would be, find somebody that you have a connection with, and my default would be go find a professional body, but it might be that if you go back and look at someone who you went to school with, or someone who was at university who might know somebody that has done that. And sometimes it's just about talking to people, and you didn't know that someone else, someone else, and that, or someone's father or someone's family friend does this and the other. And for something like this, it's much easier if you've got some kind of shared connection to do that. And I would always start that way, because it's much easier to do that. And it may be that the university, if people are still at university, the University Careers Centre knows people, or knows, you know, old graduates who've moved on to that, you know, you can reach out, say, well, hi, I know you went to this university, you're doing this, I'm interested in it. And if you've got some sort of connection, most people are quite happy to spend 5-10 minutes and just have a chat. But trying to do that with someone, just sort of going on LinkedIn thinking, oh, there's the head of McKinsey, right, I'll ask them about management consulting, probably ain't going to get anywhere. But if you can find someone who's a recent graduate of your university, someone who's in the society, someone who's a family friend, you'll have a much better conversation.
Brilliant. So you went to be a management consultant, and you problem solved with people, and then you decided to go alone, take the risk. That's pretty bold. What made you make that decision to run? Is it Energize, your
consultancy? Yeah.
Why did you do that? And then why did you choose the specialism that is it? Let me remind, business transformation.
Yeah. Well, first thing I'll say is, probably people can gather from what I've talked about before, I'm probably more comfortable with risk than some people that I know. I mean, a lot of people would never have sort of had a conversation to say, oh, you know, you thought you wanted a career in chemistry. How about working in upstream and gas, accepting the job and not really knowing what I was letting myself in for? So I do have a higher level of risk. My dad was a vet and effectively ran his own business, so I've had that kind of background. And to be honest, I think having seen that probably put me off going my own way for some time, because I knew the downsides of it. I mean, the reason I actually did this is I'd after leaving Shell, I had a series of roles with different management consultancy, which is very common in the management consultancy world. People move from one company to another. And I got a lot of experience and really enjoyed it. But I got to the point where I felt that the systems and structures within the company were kind of driving me up to be like a senior person that just sold and sold and sold. And I wasn't able to do what I felt the right thing for the client was. And I didn't sort of have control over doing that, because I felt like I had to sell something even the client didn't necessarily need it. So that's why I kind of set myself up. And I haven't regretted it, because I have it is a bit more risky, because, you know, particularly at the moment, it's a little bit, if I was working for a big company, well, I don't know, because if you're working in a big company, you don't know that there isn't going to be a round of redundancies. But, you know, I'm dependent on me generating work for me, and if that doesn't happen, you know, there's no safety net, so it can be a bit scary. On the other hand, I know how to manage that, and I'm always someone that, when I'm looking to risk, I say, can I cope with the downside? If not, can I do something about it? And if I can't, don't do it. So that's kind of that. I think that answers why I'm happy taking risk, and why I set myself up.
And what is business transformation?
Yeah,
I mean, you've gone from PhD in
I kind of
chemistry
skipped
to
that one,
petroleum engineering. You're measuring pipes to all of a sudden you're transforming business, but in what way?
Yeah. So really, what I mean, I work with companies that have decided that they need a change in direction. That they need that they're trying to implement a new strategy. It might be they're putting a new technology into the company. It might be, you know, they're looking at using advanced analytics or artificial intelligence, or just putting in a new IT infrastructure that's actually going to allow people to work more efficiently. And what I do is I sit down with the business and go, okay, you're doing all of this. What do we need the organisation to do to actually achieve all of these benefits? So I remember talking to one company, and they were like, we're putting in this whizzy new fantastic IT system, and it's really going to revolutionise our supply chain, and we're going to get rid of all the wastage. So that's like stuff that gets lost in the supply chain because they don't know where it is. And it's all going to be fantastic. So I'm like, okay. And they've got all this savings with all these headcount reductions and everything else. I'm going through it, and I'm going, okay, well, how are you going to get that figure? How are you going to find that wastage of time? Oh, well, that, you know, well, that means someone's going to have to take the data out of the system, investigate it, go and phone up the suppliers, chase this, da 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 da. So, and who's going to do that? Oh, we didn't think about that. Oh. Do you have a skill set for people to say, oh no, and how, and because that was sat between different departments, it wasn't an obvious fit. So that was my kind of role, part of my role, actually working out how that organisation was going to happen. And because they could see they could start doing it right early on in the project, we actually set up a working group to start dealing with those problems. So one, we started saving money much earlier, and two, that allowed us to build the organisation because we could see what we needed to do that piece of work. So that's the bit I do, is like, what organisation do you need to implement all these great ideas you've got, basically.
Fascinating. Wow.
So, and going back to, you kind of think, how does that fit? It's all about problem solving. It's all about looking at data. It's all about talking to people. But what really gets me is I love the fact I engage with people, and I help people have better jobs at the end of it, and that's why I do what I do.
And when we were invariably, for you guys who are watching this out there, we have a little bit of a chat in advance, so I know a little bit about what Charlotte's going to say. And one of the things you talk about is the fact that you had certain skills when you were a petroleum engineer, but you've kept certain themes that have kind of gone straight through your career. I think, have you stayed in energy, for example?
Yes. So for, I mean, we're talking about my transition, and I think I'll talk about this because I think for a lot of people on this call, because everything is changing so quickly and there are the opportunities to change, probably the jobs that exist in 5 years' time don't exist now. So when I was at university, there wasn't a business transformation consultant role that I could apply to. So for me, going through the transition, I've always kept to the things that I'm good at and that I enjoy. So for me, that started out as problem solving, looking at data analysis, all of those good things. I built on that the industry knowledge through oil and gas, and I still, even though I don't drill wells anymore, I'm still fascinated by the industry because it affects so many elements of our life, and I'm really fascinated. So taking that industry knowledge into management consultancy that gave me that distinguished me from my peers. So I hate the word USP, but effectively that was my USP. And I think for people as they work through their career, I think you do have to think about what's your USP, what's the things that distinguishes you from your peers, you know. And as a student engineer, that might be a bit more difficult. As you go through, it's clearer. And I suggest think about what things you really enjoy and how do you differentiate yourself from your peers. So it was that sort of energy expertise that I've kept going. And actually now I do a lot of work in more as an aside rather than my core business around diversity, because as you can imagine, I have often been the only woman in the room, and I use that expertise to help younger women assert themselves and get the best out of the environments they're in. So for me, it's about building on those kind of on those skills.
Really, and I think, you know, talking about finding things that you really love doing and having a passion is so very important, because that influences how good you are going to be. I mean, it's not a prerequisite if you're amazing at you know, if you really love doing something, it doesn't mean you're definitely going to be amazing at doing it, but you've got a better chance because that passion could take you forward. It's in alone. Now, going back to the storytelling, you've gone from a Morris Minor to a pickup truck to a, you know, various upgrading through your BMWs possibly. You're now an electric car. And what does it really mean for you? You kind of said to me, oh, I'm on like a pool electric car in my management consultancy world.
Well, I think I'm kind of, I think very much, and I think not just me, I think world, I feel very much I'm at this sort of crossroads, because I think there's the world is changing very much. The world has been changing very quickly, and as a specialist in change, I've seen it, you know, the speed in which we're changing digitally, the energy transition in terms of us going into renewables, the social that in terms of how social we change with things like Me Too, and the real demands from people around the environment, which is actually making real change to big companies, well, not real change, but big companies and governments are actually starting to listen to, which a few years ago that wasn't there. All of these things are really shifting. COVID-19 has just focused it and accelerated a number of these things. So for me, from a purely, I'll say, professional point of view, and I'm not going to say COVID-19 is a good thing, and I don't think it is a good thing. However, what I'm very interested in is because now, for example, everybody is working from home, and given the latest guidelines in the UK, where the government said go back to working from home, and they're indicating that might be another 6 months. In theory, that might mean we've got, I think it's something like about 90% of the population now working from home, 90% of the population working at home for a year. What does that do for working in organizations, and what does that change, and what does that mean in terms of you're trying to shift things in an organization? I don't have the answers, but I find it very fascinating. So for me, what I do and how that's evolving is very interesting, because I think that's, so for me, I kind of see that as and that's kind of why I've got this sort of electric car thing, because the technology on electric cars, as probably the people on the call here are more familiar than me, and they know how much it's changing, because you know, we've got a charging electric car. Well, actually, is that the future, or is it the hydrogen car, or is there another technology out there? And so I feel very much that's the way that where I am at the moment, and what does management consultancy look like? Because I think that's shifting, and where did my business go in that perspective? So that's kind of where I feel I am now. And I think, without scaring people on the call, I think there is a lot of change. However, there's a lot of opportunity, and it's about going back to sort of passion. I think that's where taking the opportunity to look outside of what you're doing and explore other things is really important, because you see opportunities that way.
And I think a good point you made earlier was about the fact that the job that you have now wasn't around so many years ago. And many of the students but the job that they have in 10 years' time isn't going to be even invented right now.
And it's quite scary, but quite cool.
It is cool and scary, but and I guess there it's about instilling certain skills that allow you to be flexible and resilient and seize opportunities with those
and
in mind.
looking outside of what you do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I think you touched on the word passion, and I remember hearing that as a student. Do something you enjoy, have a passion in life, and it's kind of like, what is my passion? It's only as I've got older that I've developed things. So I've always loved science, and that's still there. But now I really love developing people. And another thing that's a huge passion of mine is, which is why I've got these weird pictures behind me, is weird contemporary art. And that I definitely wasn't into as a student. And now that really augments my life and actually helps, because I go and look at things, and people with different ways of expressing things helps me in what I do at the moment. So my other thing is, do what you want to do, but don't be too worried if you don't quite know what your passion is. Just keep going and doing things you enjoy, and it'll evolve.
Because I think in many ways, I know when I started out my career, I didn't know what was really going to be passionate about until I did it. I mean, I was quite fortunate. I went to work for a PR consultancy, and I worked for multiple clients across different types of industries, whether it was the local airport, whether it was in HR, and then it was in microchips, and it was actually working on microchips that I realized I really love tech. And I came from an engineering family, so and that kind of all kept matched together with my desire for business and marketing and PR and everything. And then I realized, well, that's actually my passion, and then that's how I kind of built on it from there. So I think the point there is, don't be afraid to go out and give it a go. And if you don't know what your passion is, you'll find out along the way.
And because it might be the whole aspect of having a job for life doesn't exist anymore, and that's partly because jobs are changing so quickly, and that means you get to do some cool things that you couldn't imagine that you would do. And things like technology is taking a lot of the drudge out of work. I mean, when I was a petroleum engineer, one of my jobs was they had to have an emergency room with all of the updated logs and all of the information, and that was all paper based. So you can imagine it was never updated, and so every year I had to go down and print out all the things, make sure, and then things were misfiled and blah blah, and then you could never find the right thing. Not saying it's perfect in electronic, but you could never find it because there was one thing and it was a paper thing. Now, well, our problem is probably more the other way. There's too much data, but the technology makes it a lot easier to update something like that, for example. So then you can focus on other things which are potentially more interesting than, you're the junior, you can go and do all the boring jobs like update the the control room. Great.
And I think if you comparing perhaps my graduate experience to when I've had a marketing assistant who's doing a graduate work with me, then you can jump straight into the nitty gritty straight away, rather than, as you say, for me, my equivalent was doing press cuttings for hours on end, cutting up pieces of paper and sticking them into reports for clients, and thinking they're all automated now. That doesn't really, it's all done in little reports that you pull off digitally, job done. It's an hour or two's job, not 5 days. And so I think seizing that as an opportunity and recognizing that as you as a graduate, you're going to, as a new technology, be able to really get into things.
And I think that's one very important skill, which I think most graduates have, but stay up to date with technology, because that's what will differentiate you from other people. Because if you know about the new tech, then that might get you your new opportunity, and it might allow you to break into something that you didn't think was possible, because you're the one with those skills that no one else has, and they're willing to take a risk because they don't know anything about it.
which, I mean, we've already been talking about your tips, haven't we?
Yeah,
Sorry, we
exactly.
didn't formalise that discussion, but here we are, formalising now for you to carry on with Charlotte. So Charlotte's top tips for a fulfilling career.
So number one, follow your passion. And for me, it's really important to do something you enjoy doing. If you're working and you're doing something you don't like, now, okay, everyone has their off day, but if you're consistently thinking, I don't want to get up and go to work, you need to change something. Either that's about dealing with it internally or moving jobs. And I would always suggest of trying to sort it out internally before you change jobs, because it's much easier because you've already got the relationships. But always do that, because I know people that haven't, and it's just like, why not? You've just wasted 20 years, which is why I've made so many different transitions, because that's what I've always done. And that leads nicely to career transitions.
You spend a lot of time at work to be miserable.
You do. All I can say. You do. So don't make sure you're happy in work, and make sure you're doing something you enjoy, and you find a way of doing that. Yes, there are times which is tough, but generally you want to be doing that. And I think increasingly career transitions are going to be the norm than the exception. I know that for me, compared to my peers, I've done a lot of career transition that most of my peers don't. I think the kind of career I've had will probably be more of the norm of today's current graduates. And and for me specifically, for me to make the transition from a petroleum engineer to being a management consultant, it was very much about tailoring myself and making sure I was selling myself in the future role, not the current role, and also taking, which I didn't really talk very much about, taking something from my old role that would distinguish me. And because I had the industry knowledge as a management consultant, I was able to get much more interesting and more and bigger roles, because I had that industry expertise. They could put me in front of a client and I could talk about the industry, which would give me credibility, and then the team could support me on the management consultant skills, which I could learn. So think about if you can not do too big a jump, but keep something that you're good at, because that'll speed things up. Explore and think outside the box. I think we've talked about that. It's very much about the job that currently you may be doing in 5 years' time doesn't exist. So keep looking outside. And fundamentally, I didn't talk very much about this, but this is about network. We talked a little bit about how do you find somebody to help you if you're looking at how do you find a new job, like within the professional services, or finding somebody through the university or your school or something like that. And what I think is very important is nowadays it's very much about knowing what's happening, and the more people you have in your network that can support you, the better. And building a network isn't just about how many connections you have on LinkedIn. And I hope I'm just going to say one thing on this call: do not just connect people on LinkedIn. If you think there is someone you really want to talk to, tell them why you want to connect, and preferably ask them if they can have a call or a connection because you want to find something out. Don't just connect for the sake of connecting, because that's not a proper networking build. And when you're networking, always try and do something for someone else. Even if you're a student and you think, how can I possibly help the senior person? Always offer. And if they really have helped you, send them an email a few months later and tell them how they've helped you and what you've done. And you might even decide to actually, culturally this might be a bit challenging, but buy a coffee, buy them lunch, send them a little batch, just to show how much you appreciate it, because people remember that. And you never know, 5-10 years down the line, how that might help you. So, always remember it should be reciprocal. And even if you don't think you can help, always offer.
Brilliant. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much. That's been really, really insightful. Those people who've been watching this live, don't forget you can put your comments or your questions in the chat box. And if you did enjoy it, then let Charlotte know. Let us know by putting a like You can say in the comment box if you want to, but liking the video is great. Sharing the video is fantastic. And you can subscribe to the playlist. I'll put the link at the top of the video, of the chat box. You can subscribe to that for more of these videos. And we're in talks with some really interesting engineers about joining us on these future Drive Live with an Engineer sessions. And yes, I've said share, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Charlotte, I hope you've enjoyed it as well.
I have, and I hope there's some tips there that will help people in their careers, because I've learned a lot from other people, and it's great to be able to share what I've learned with other people.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. We're going to wrap that up for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for Drive Live with an Engineer. Do join us next time. We will be back again soon. See you again. Thank you, Charlotte,
Bye.
and goodbye.